Hey, it's Dave here. In this video, I'm going to be diving into mmWave presence detection in Home Assistant and how you can use it to create proper room level automations, including taking advantage of zone-based detection. Now, there are quite a few different ways to integrate mmWave sensors, but in this video, I'm going to be focusing on the Everything Presence Lite, mainly because it's one of the most popular options right now and it integrates really nicely with Home Assistant. We're going to bring the device into Home Assistant, set up Zone Configurator, and then build an example automation so you can actually see how this works in practice. Let's get to it. Before we jump into the setup, let's quickly cover what mmWave actually is and how it compares to other types of presence detection. So traditionally, most smart homes use PIR sensors, which detect motion based on heat changes. The problem is, as soon as you stop moving, they think the room is empty, so your presence can suddenly switch to clear, which might turn your lights off even though you're still in the room. mmWave works differently. Instead of detecting motion, it detects presence using radio waves to pick up even very small movements like breathing or slight shift in a position. So you can be sat completely still on a sofa and it still knows you're there. Now, another approach you might have seen is Bluetooth-based tracking like ESPHome or Bermuda. These work by tracking your phone or a beacon and estimate which room you're in. And they're great, especially for whole room tracking, but they rely on you actually carrying a device. So if you compare these three, PIR, simple and cheap, but not reliable for presence. Bluetooth, good for room tracking, but depends on your device. mmWave, best for real-time presence, but a bit more setup. There isn't really a one-size-fits-all solution, but for this kind of setup, mmWave is by far the most accurate. So now that we've got a rough idea of how mmWave compares, let's get the Everything Presence Lite set up and into Home Assistant. Once you've powered it on, grab your phone with the Home Assistant companion app. From the Home Assistant app, if you click on the hamburger menu on the top left, then select Settings, select Devices and Services, and you should see your Everything Presence sensor discovered via BLE. Click Add. Then it's going to prompt you for your Wi-Fi details. Enter those in and click Continue. And just wait for it to connect. Once that's connected, if you click Continue, it's now going to show again under Discovered, but with a slightly more descriptive name. And this is the stage where we're now going to set it up with ESPHome. So if you select OK from Do you want to set up ESPHome, then select which device, and then click Submit. And just before you click Skip and Finish, I'm going to change the name and assign it to an area. So I change the name to Everything Presence Lite, and I'm just going to add _2 because it's the second device I have, and I'll assign it to bedroom and then click Finish. It's then going to take you to a device info page, but before I talk about that, I'm going to come off my mobile phone and carry on from my PC and navigate into ESPHome where we can take control of the device. From Home Assistant, if you go into ESPHome Builder, and on the top right, if you make sure that Show is selected so you can see discovered devices, and when I click on that, you can now see the Everything Presence Lite. I'm now going to select Take Control, and I'm just going to rename it to what I had it earlier. So it's got _2. Then I'm going to select Take Control, and then click Install to flash the firmware where ESPHome has full control. This can take a few minutes because it needs to compile the code before it can upload and flash the firmware. And now that that's finished flashing the firmware, I can click Stop to close that window. And you can see Everything Presence Lite 2 is showing here online, and ESPHome now has full control of that device. Now that that's been reflashed, we're going to go into Settings, Devices and Services and view that device. I'm going to open up a new tab as I may need to go back to this one in a second. So go into Settings, Devices and Services. And because I've reflashed it, you're probably going to see it show as a discovered device where it's prompting to reconfigure. So if I click that button, and it's asking for the encryption key, which you can get from ESPHome. So if I go back to that other tab again, and then from here, I'm just going to select Edit, and I'm just going to copy this encryption key, and then go back to the other tab and paste it in here. Then click Submit, and then click Close. While we're here, if we just search for ESPHome, and I'm just going to find that new device, which is this one here. And this is going to bring you up all the device info and sensor information. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail in terms of what these entity values are and what they do, because if you head over to the official documentations page, Lewis has already done an excellent job in explaining it. One thing you'll notice here is it does reference which entities are disabled by default. And if I go back to here again and scroll down, you can reveal those disabled entities, most of which are relating to the zones. But before you go into a frenzy and start enabling all of these, you only want to have the ones enabled which you are going to use. And if I just go to this FAQ page here and scroll down a little bit further, you'll see there's a question where someone said, "My Home Assistant database has grown significantly in size since installing the Everything Presence Lite, and one of her suggested solutions is disable the entities." So just bear that in mind, only enable the entities you're going to use, otherwise you may put some stress on your database. I will be covering the zone configurator shortly, and when I go through that, you will need to start enabling certain zones based on how many you use. So we will go back to this setting and enable settings when they're required. Now, if you're not going to be taking advantage of zones, the main values that you'll be playing with is occupancy, which is this one here, and it will change to detected once it's noticed a presence. And if I click into it and then go to settings, that's the entity ID that you'll want to copy if you're going to use it for an automation. You've got illuminance, which is just the brightness. Same again, going to settings, and that's the entity ID if you want it. Zone occupancy is only going to have zone 1 by default, which is more or less going to do exactly the same with occupancy until you start configuring a zone. You've then got assume presence value here, and this is just the default timeout. After 15 seconds of no presence detected, it's then going to revert back to clear. And if I just scroll down a little bit further, you've got the built-in LED. You might want to use that on perhaps for debugging or when presence is detected. You could have that built-in LED turn on and off. Maximum distance is one you might play with. I'm just going to leave it at default, which is 6 meters. But perhaps if you only wanted occupancy to be detected at 1 meter, then you may change it to 100. The rest of these settings will make more sense as I move on to Zone Configurator, as you don't really need to configure them directly from this section. Now we're going to install the Zone Configurator, which is what we use to set up our room layout and zones. The official documentation details the steps to install the Everything Presence Zone Configurator from the App Store and contains a link here to automatically add the URL of the repository. Now, for those of you installing it from a Docker environment, if I just scroll down a little bit further, you'll see it details the steps there. Now, I'm going to be doing it from a supervisor. So from Home Assistant, if we go into Settings, Now, as of Home Assistant 2026.2, add-ons have now been renamed to apps. So click on apps, then click install app. And if you click on those three dots on the top right and select repositories, and we're just going to paste in that URL and then click add, then close. And now if I do a search for everything, you should see you got the option Everything Presence Zone Creator. So we're going to click on that and then click install. Once that's installed, if we just check Watchdog, so it will restart if it crashes, check Show in Sidebar, and you should now see it here as one of the options. And then I'm just going to click Start. Just before we open this web UI, if you go to this Documentations tab here and scroll all the way down, this section contains links to the entire setup process, and we will be carrying on from this part, set up my first device. So I'll click on that, and I'm just going to go back to the other tab. If we click the Info tab and then select Open Web UI. Now, the first time you launch this, you're going to get some form of a wizard pop up, which I recall will be this one here asking you to select your device. Because I've already installed and launched this previously, it's just going to show no room selected. To bring up the wizard, I'm going to click on the menu icon and select Add Device. And the one I'm going to be using is Everything Presence Lite _1, which is currently situated in the kitchen. Now, as I scroll down, you're going to see various entities are currently disabled, such as Zone 2, 3, 4, the exclusion zones, and the entry zones. Don't worry about that for now, because as we go through the setup in Zone Configurator, I'll show you how to enable these entities in ESPHome later. Now, because I renamed my device, there's a chance if you have some problems with firmware service mapping, you may have to just manually select it here and choose the correct one. I'm just going to leave that and select Continue. Now we've got the option to set up a room, and just to clarify, you don't have to set up a room. It's purely optional, as it serves mainly as a visual representation, but it's worth doing. So I'm going to select New Room, and I'm going to give it the name Main Room, because this is going to be a combination of the lounge, dining room, and kitchen. Now I'll click Create Room and Continue, and then just click Let's Go to Draw Room Outline. If I just go back to the documentation, what you'll need to do now is click to place the first corner point, continue clicking to add more points, press Enter or click the first point to close the shape, and press Escape to cancel. And it also lists some keyboard shortcuts here. One thing just to point out, that the Enter key and the Escape key are somewhat the same outcome, or at least it is when I try this. The only difference is that when I press Enter, it seems to align the shape centered to the screen, where if I press Escape, it just completes the shape still. I'll show you what I mean by that. So I can either click Add Wall or I can click A. And now I'm just going to make a very basic shape. And once you click the third time, it's going to start joining them together. And here we've got this shape. And if I just move across, and I'm now going to press Enter, and you can see it's center aligned it. If I now press Clear, and I'm just going to press the keyboard shortcut A to add a wall. And now as I do this again, this time I'm going to press the Escape key. It does actually seem to do the same outcome. It's quite possible I might be misreading this, but it does seem you only really need to just remember, press Enter to finish a shape, Use the A key to add point at cursor and the delete key to use the last point. So you perhaps don't need to worry too much about the escape key. One thing also to note is when you press the delete key, it will delete the last entry point, which is that one here. But let's just say I was creating a wall and I've made it like this, and then I use these points to slightly redefine it. And then I decide, actually, I want to put this back to how it was, but I can't remember. You can't undo that. So if I press the delete key now, it's just going to delete that last point opposed to where you last moved it to. So just bear that in mind when you're drawing the wall and you're moving it around. If you press the delete key, it's not so much an undo point, but more it just deletes the last point of reference. Now this is my flat floor plan, and the area that I'm going to be focusing on is this section here. Now this is an open plan and actually one room, but I want to section it into a lounge, dining room and kitchen. I'm then going to position my Everything Presence Lite sensor directly here, which is on top of a refrigerator, and with the aim of the mmWave sensor to just about detect occupancy from the lounge, dining room or kitchen by creating and using zones. Quick tip before we go any further. One thing that's really worth doing is mounting your sensor in a way that you can move it but still put it back in exactly the same position. What I've done here is designed a small clip which the Everything Presence Lite sits into, and that clip is attached using Velcro. So I can tweak the position to get the angle just right and then snap it straight back in to the exact same spot without losing my calibration. The reason this matters is because once you've set up your zones, everything is based on positioning and angles. So if a sensor moves even slightly, you'll end up having to recalibrate everything again. This just saves a lot of time and frustration, and if you want a copy of the 3D file, I'll leave a link in the description. Right, now that's in place, let's carry on setting up the room and defining the layout. Using some measurements which I took earlier, I'm now going to draw the wall to cover the area where the lounge, dining room and kitchen is. Now this next part I can't initially do here because the angles are snapped at 45 degrees, which isn't exactly how the layout goes. So I'm just going to set it with the precise measurements and we'll deal with that in a second. And now I'm just going to press enter to finish. And while this particular area here isn't at the correct angle, what you can do is click on this section and drag it across to make the angle as close as it can as shown from the image. That doesn't look too bad, so I'm just going to leave it like that. Now I'm going to click next, and it's going to ask me to place my device. I've got it positioned roughly about here, and it's slightly angled, so it's probably aiming in around this sort of section. So I'm just going to change the rotation from this slider bar. Now it's going to give me this prompt about line zones to the wall, and I'm just going to click apply. At this point, I'm going to do a quick sanity check and validate this on the fly. So I've got Zone View open on my laptop, and I'm basically going to walk around the room to make sure the walls I've drawn are accurate enough. What I'm looking for here is that my position lines up roughly with where I am in real life. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be close enough so the zones behave as expected. So let's test it out. So now I'm moving to this corner, and that doesn't look too bad. And I'm now going to move to this corner. Sometimes if it shows another device, it's actually because I've just walked outside of the area. I'm now going to walk into the kitchen, and let's see how far I can go before the Everything Presence, which is over there, can't quite see me. I'm probably out of the areas now. Yep, I seem to have disappeared. So I'm just going to try and walk back in again. Yep, so I've now reappeared. So that's good enough so that I can at least be detected in the kitchen. And now I'm going to walk to the lounge area and see how far I can go before I disappear. Seem to have walked outside of the walls. So the floor plan isn't perfect, but it's good enough. I'm going to go back into the dining room. So that's great. Now I'm going to click Next. And to add doors, I just want to make it clear, you have to have created a wall, otherwise you won't be able to do this. I'm going to click Add Door. That looks fine. And if you need to move the door, you have to use this slider bar here, where you can just position it left to right. And mine's an outward door. If I wanted it inward, it'd be that way, but it's outward. So that's fine. I can click the X. Now I'm going to click Next. And I'm just going to quickly add some furniture. When you're adding furniture, this really is just a visual aid, so you don't actually need to do it. But I would walk around the furniture and map it out. So I'm going to select Add Furniture. And while there isn't a search function, you can press Ctrl F and do a search from the browser. And I'm just going to type in sofa. I can see there I've got two-seater, that's fine. And I'm just going to walk to where the sofa is. So that will give me a guide as the placement. I'm just going to rotate the angle so it's facing the wall. And I'm just going to go to the other end of the sofa and see where that thinks it is. So you can see another person's appeared. It's because I've briefly walked outside the area. But that placement isn't too bad. Let's just walk by the front of the sofa. That's about right. And I'm just going to walk around the back. Okay, so that placement's pretty good. I'm just going to slightly change the size. So I'm going to uncheck lock aspect ratio. Just going to make it a little bit wider. That's about right. And now I'm just going to very quickly add some other furniture. That's looking good. And now I'm going to click Next. And this is the part where you're going to be adding zones. Now you've got the option, you can either use a rectangular zone or you can use a polygon zone. I'm going to change it to polygon zone because the Everything Presence Lite supports it. The benefit with a polygon one is it's not limited to a square shape. You can actually add multiple different points. If I just go to the documentation, you'll see here it gives you a bit more of a description of polygon zones. And again, like the furniture placement, if you are going to make zones, what I would do is just walk around so you can map out the zone and then place it. All I really want is 3 zones, one for the lounge, one for the dining room, and one for the kitchen. I'm going to place this one mostly around the couch because the automation that I'm going to be showing is based on the scenario where I'm more or less going to be sitting on the couch. So this should work quite nicely if I sort of place it around here. Now this part might catch you out when using the initial setup wizard, because when you click on Show Polygon Zones, I can only see zone 1 and can't see the option to add another zone. It's quite possibly because the entities are still disabled, but if you just close that zones window and click Next, when we go back into Zone Editor, you will see the option to add additional zones. And here you can push the zones to the device. So I'm going to do that now. I'm just going to click Finish and go to Dashboard. And you can now see Zone 1 exists. If I click on the menu button and go back to Zone Editor, Show Zones, that's better. Now it's going to give me the option to start adding additional zones. So I'm now going to make Zone 2. This is basically going to be where the dining room is. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm standing in a dining room area, and I'm just going to make that zone. Something just to make you aware of, if you try to create a zone outside of that green area where the mmWave is angled, it's going to throw an error message and it will force you to change that. I'm just going to add one more zone, which will be the kitchen. So if I just hover to the kitchen area, and I'm just going to quickly name them. You can also add exclusion zones, which will stop detection. So perhaps if you've got an animal and you might have a cat flap, and you could sort of add an exclusion zone around that area so that presence will be discarded. And you've also got entry zones as well. They're quite good if you've got maybe a front door, and you could then use that to trigger an automation so that you'll be able to tell where someone's entering the building or exiting the building. I'm just going to leave it as it is for now and click Close. And now we're going to save the zone. And I'm just going to go back to the live dashboard. And you can see you've got these zones here. So it's got kitchen, dining room, and lounge. If I go back into the menu and go to Settings, you may have a warning where it's showing entities not synced. Consider resyncing. So I'm going to click on Resync Entries. But before I do that, I've purposely made a mistake, and I wonder if you know what it is before I click in here. So as I scroll down, you're going to notice zones 2, 3, 4, and a few others are showing as disabled. When I click into here, there's various entities that have got the warning disabled in Home Assistant. And that's because from ESPHome, I haven't enabled those entities. And following the documentation, it gives you the solution here where you go to Home Assistant, go to Settings, Devices and Services, and then find your device under ESPHome. Click on the device to see all the entities and find the disabled entities where you're going to enable them. I'm going to show you that method, and I'm also going to show you a slightly quicker way that you can do it in bulk. So if I just open up another tab, go to Settings, Devices and Services, do a search for ESPHome, and I'm just going to find that device. Which is this one here. And as I scroll down a little bit further, you can see there's 25 disabled entities. And what you'll need to do is click on all of those ones that you want to sync, select Settings, click Enable, and then OK, and repeat that for everyone. If I go back to the other window, and I'm just going to copy part of the text of those entities, that will be the same for all of them. Now I'm going to open another tab, go to Settings, Devices and Services, and this time we're going to select Entities. Now if you go to Filters and change status from enabled to disabled. And we're going to paste in that text in the search. And I'm just going to add zone at the end. And if you check enter selection mode, this is going to list most, if not all, of those entities that you want to re-enable. There'll be one or two that you don't need to be, but a bulk of them will be the ones you need. As you can see, these are all related to zones. So what I'm going to do is just check that box to select all of them. And then if you click on that action button and then choose enable selected and then click enable, it's going to give you a warning. It'll take about 30 seconds. Now I can go back to this section. I'm just going to cancel that window, give it about 30 seconds, and then I'm going to go back into Resync, and I should find, hopefully I've got all of those entities, and they now should be showing enabled for the sync to work. So I'm going to click Resync Entries, and that's looking better. Okay, there seems to be a couple I've missed out, exclusion zones. Those ones are actually optional, so that's fine. And if I just look at entry zones, again, it's mentioning some optional ones, but I didn't actually create entry zones, so that's fine. Now we can click continue. And that's looking much better. It's in green text and it's showing entity synced 92 auto matched. So that's a good sign. Another thing you're also going to want to do is back up this settings. You can either just back up these zones or you can just back up the entire room. I would actually do a combination of the two and then save the JSON file. And the device that I was working with is this Everything Presence Lite _1. So just make sure you change that to the correct one because it's naturally showing in alphabetical order. I'm now going to click Create Backup and that shows as synced. So that's looking good. And I'm just going to click Backup All as well. And that's going to download a JSON file. I would save that somewhere safe that you know, because it does take a bit of effort creating that room plan, creating those zones. And if something happened and you lost it, at least you'll be able to restore it quickly. Or perhaps if you started tinkering in Zone Editor and you wanted to revert back, then you've got that choice. Now that we've finished setting up zones, I'm going to create an automation which I'll call Cinema Mode. I'm going to use a vibration sensor as the trigger, and when it's enabled, it will close the curtains, turn off the lights, and then as I walk into the kitchen, the lights turn on, but as soon as I walk back into the lounge and sit down, the lights immediately turn off. Now previously, I've demoed something similar using two Everything Presence 1 devices, but with zones, I can now achieve the same result with a single Everything Presence Lite for less than half the cost. Now, while you can build this as a single automation, I'm going to split this into two so it's easier to follow and easier for you to reuse the code. So let's start by creating a helper which will act as an input boolean called Cinema Mode. So from Home Assistant, if you go to Settings, then Devices and Services, and if you select Helpers, then click Create Helper. And if you scroll down and look for Toggle, which is this one here, and I'm just going to give it the name Cinema Mode. And if I select Icon, I'm going to give it the Theatre icon. Then click Create. And if I just do a search for Cinema Mode, you can now see the input boolean has been created. And if I go to Settings, you've got the entity ID here in case you want to copy it. You might also want to go to Voice Assistants and just make sure these are enabled, because if you have got an Amazon Echo, Google Assist or the Home Assistant voice, you might want the entity exposed so it can be controlled via one of those options. And then if I just click back, if you had made any changes, just click Update to close that window. Now we're going to set up the first part of this automation. This is the part that turns on cinema mode, closes the curtains, and turns off the lights. So if we go to Settings, go to Automations and Scenes, and select Create Automation, and then Create New Automation. And if you click on the three dots here and select Edit in YAML, and I'm just going to paste in this code. To make this easier to explain, I've added comments into my YAML so you can see what each section does, and I will be sharing this code in GitHub. Unfortunately, as soon as you save this, or if you click on the three dots and select Edit in Visual Editor, and then go back to Edit in YAML, you will lose the comments automatically. But this might just assist you initially when going through the YAML and making the changes so the automation works for yourself. And out of interest, if you like this approach or it helps your setup, let me know in the comments section. Starting from the top, I'm using a vibration sensor, and when the state changes to on, that will be the trigger. Then we've got some conditions. If the input boolean cinema mode is currently in the off state, it's going to change it to on, and then it will close my curtains. Then it's going to turn off the lights in that room, and because some of my lights are known as switches, I've had to break this action up into two parts. The dining room, which is this part here, is actually a light, and the lights for the kitchen and the lounge are actually controlled by a on-off switch. Then it's going to change the value of the zone occupancy delay because it would default initially to 15 seconds. So if I was to walk into the kitchen and then immediately back into the lounge, there's a good chance the occupancy in the lounge is still going to be showing as detection, so the lights won't turn off. So as soon as I walk into the kitchen, I want the occupancy in the lounge to clear before I can walk back into it. And the last part is I've got a notification. Notify.notify, which is this part here, will send a notification to my mobile phones which have the Home Assistant app installed. And I've additionally got an Amazon Echo, so it's going to broadcast an announcement saying cinema mode enabled. The second half is more or less identical but doing the reverse. The only thing it doesn't do is make any changes to the curtains. It will turn the lights all back on and disable the automation, but I just wanted the curtains to remain at the state they were because they might have already been closed when I turned this on. So you've got this condition now. If the vibration sensor goes on and input boolean cinema mode is on, it's then going to turn the input boolean cinema mode to off. It's going to restore the lighting and turn my kitchen light and my lounge light on. It's then going to restore the value of the zone occupancy delays back to 15 seconds. And then it's going to send a notification like the first half did, where it's going to notify on my mobile saying cinema mode disabled. And I'm also going to get a notification on my Amazon Echo to say cinema mode disabled. That way, when I'm hitting the vibration sensor, it will both toggle it off and on, and I'll get some form of notification to acknowledge it's either enabled or disabled. Now I'm going to quickly update the entity IDs to values which are real, but I'm only going to cover the ones which are perhaps not so obvious. So if I just scroll back up. Now for your lights, there's a good chance they're probably not a combination of lights or switches. They're more likely one or the other. So if your lights aren't set up as a switch, you can just delete that entire section, or if they are set as a switch and they're not known as a light, you can delete this part. Otherwise you'll have to update both. This particular part here, where it's got the zone occupancy delay, I'm just going to open up another tab and show you how to find that value. So if you go to Settings, Devices and Services, and do a search for ESPHome, and I'm just going to find my presence sensor, which is this one here. And if I just scroll down a little bit further, you've got this value here, which is zone occupancy delay. And if you just go to settings, and you'll need to copy that value. So I'm going to paste that in here. And in my example, I'm actually bouncing between zone 1 and zone 3. So I'm now going to find the other one. So if I just scroll down a little bit further and look for zone 3, which is this one here. And again, I'm going to copy that value and then update it. You're going to want to do that again at the bottom of this code. So I'm just going to copy this text and scroll back down again. And I'm just going to overwrite this part here. I'm just going to jump into the future so that all the entity IDs have been set. So it should look something like this. I'm now going to click Save, leave those settings as they are and select Rename. And for those of you not too comfortable with YAML, if you click on these 3 dots, you can select Edit in Visual Editor. But I'll just warn you, as soon as you click on this and then go back, all of the comments will unfortunately disappear. So this now gives you a visual representation of how the automation works. And I'm just going to go back and select Edit in YAML, and you'll see the comments has disappeared. But hopefully me adding those comments just made the code a little bit easier when you initially set it up. Now we're going to create the second automation, which is when input Boolean cinema mode is turned on. When you walk into the kitchen light will turn on, and as soon as you walk into the lounge, the kitchen light will turn back off. So if I just go back one step and then select Create Automation, Create New Automation, click on those 3 dots and select Edit in YAML, and I'm going to paste in some more code. This section of the code is considerably easier to explain. You've got the trigger states here, which is broken into 2. When zone occupancy 1 is set to on, it's going to set the trigger state ID to 1. And when zone occupancy 2 is on, it's going to set the trigger ID to 2. Now in my setup, I'm actually bouncing between zones 1 and 3. But for the code I'm sharing, I'll leave it for the scenario you're bouncing between zones 1 and 2. You've then got the condition here, which is when input Boolean cinema mode is on. So the automation won't do anything unless that state is set to true. And then based on which zone is triggered, it's going to run one of the following 2 actions, which is either this one or this one. So starting from the top, if zone 1 is triggered, it's going to turn the kitchen light to off. For me, zone 1 is the lounge when I'm sitting in the couch. And then zone 2 is going to be the kitchen area. So when you walk into the kitchen lights will turn on. I'm now going to update the entity IDs to values which are real. And if I just quickly scroll up, the only one I'm going to show you how to do is this particular part here, which is important, which is the zone occupancy. The rest, I'm going to more or less assume you probably know how to do that. So if I open up another tab, if you go to Settings, Devices and Services, and do a search for ESPHome, and I'm just going to find that presence sensor again, which is this one here. And the zone occupancy that you'll need to look for is this particular part here. So if I click on zone occupancy 1, go to settings, and that's the value you'll need to be copying. So I'm just going to update this, and then back on the other tab. And in my example, it's actually zone 3 occupancy. So I'm going to copy that value here as well. So it looks something like that. I'm just going to fast forward to where all the entity IDs have now been set. So that's now been updated. And if I just scroll down, you can see I've specified the entity IDs of my kitchen lights. I'm now going to click Save, leave the values as they are and select Rename. And if you did want to visually see how the automation works, you can click on these three dots and select Edit in Visual Editor. But again, warning, the comments will disappear. So you can see that's how I've set it up. You've got these trigger states here, which is going to set the trigger ID to 1, and this one here will set the trigger ID to 2. There's a condition where cinema mode must be on, and you've got these two options. Based on which trigger ID is true, it's then going to turn the light on, and for option 2, it's going to turn the light off. Now I'm going to show you a live demo of this working, but before I do, quick heads up on the trigger I used. I went with a vibration sensor, and while it does work, it took a few attempts to get it just right. Even with the different sensitivity settings, I found it was either a bit too sensitive, or I had to give it a proper whack, sometimes more than once, to get it to trigger. So if you're setting up something like this yourself, you might be better off using something like a Zigbee button instead. That will give you a much more consistent trigger. Anyway, here's the demo. So there I am sitting down, and I'm going to give that sensor a whack. The lights are going to turn off. You can see the curtains are closing.
Cinema mode enabled.
And I've just received my announcement from my Amazon Echo device. And as I walk into the kitchen, the light will turn on. And now as I walk back into the lounge area, the lights are going to automatically turn off. And if I want to disable cinema mode, I just give it another whack and the lights turn back on again.
Cinema mode disabled.
So that's how you use mmWave and Sones to build a proper room-aware automation in Home Assistant. In the next video, we're going to take it even further, adding a CO2 module to the Everything Presence Lite and adding a custom RGB LED to visualize air quality and trigger announcements only when presence is actually detected. I'll link that in the description as soon as it goes live, and if you found this video helpful, a like really helps the channel, and consider subscribing so you don't miss future smart home videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.